Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Kirstyn Leuner, an assistant professor of English at Santa Clara University. And on behalf of the organizers, I'd like to welcome you to Resistance in the Materials, a gathering of printers pressing for change. This is the last day of our 2-day bi-coastal event following yesterday's fantastic plenary speakers. Resistance in the Materials is a collaboration between the year-long anti-racism series at the University of Maryland's Center for Literary and Comparative Studies and Santa Clara University's Center for the Arts and Humanities. Our collaboration foregrounds printing, broadly conceived as a mode of expression and communication that is deeply activist, resistant, and resilient. While printmaking can be practiced with very expensive and heavy machinery, like a Vandercook letterpress, it can also be practiced with accessible materials you can find around the house, as in during a pandemic, like a homemade stamp and an ink pad. This 2-day event highlights BIPOC printers and a few allies who use diverse modalities of print to create spaces that resist white supremacy and other systematic oppressors. This event also models how the circulation or exchange of material prints can spark dialogue about injustice and social change. At a moment when the US Postal Service was under political and ideological attack, the organizers found ourselves inspired by mail art, the stamp replacing the Wi-Fi connection, and the envelope replacing the Zoom room. Mailing postcards and letters has long been a form of political activism. So we paired up our speakers and asked each of them to mail at least one print to their partner and to respond to each other's prints in their talks. One goal of ours for this event is to inspire activist print-mail exchanges to continue beyond the limits of the event. So that our audience can easily access the print work that resulted from our speakers' print exchange, we have created a slideshow available to you in Google Drive. That link is in the chat. Today, we will feature a roundtable of 4 printers who work in very different media, and each will speak for 10 minutes, followed by discussion and Q&A. After the roundtable, we will take a brief break and then reconvene for a print pop-up mixer in a Zoom room. During the print mixer, we invite all panelists and all attendees especially to join us and casually share prints you've made, hang out, and get to know one another and reflect on the event. You have the link to the mixer in your Eventbrite confirmation and also in our chat. Finally, on behalf of my fellow organizers, Kathy Aoki at Santa Clara University, Matthew Kirschenbaum, Carrie Krause, and Aaron Bartlett at the University of Maryland, I would like to thank the entities that have supported and sponsored Resistance in the Materials: the Center for the Arts and Humanities at Santa Clara, and the Center for Literary and Comparative Studies and Book Lab at Maryland. We also especially thank Drs. Michelle Burnham, Tita Chico, Karen Nelson, and Amy Randall in their capacity as administrators of those centers, as well as Maryland graduate students Liam Daly and Danielle Griffin for their behind-the-scenes support. Our social media hashtag for today's event is hashtag pressing4change, where 4 is a numeral. And we will now read land acknowledgements for both universities before we introduce the roundtable speakers. We pause to acknowledge that Santa Clara University sits on the land of the Ohlone and Muwekma Ohlone people, who trace their ancestry through the missions Dolores, Santa Clara, and San Jose. We remember their connection to this region and give thanks for the opportunity to live, work, learn, and pray on their traditional homeland. Let us take a moment of silence to pay respect to their elders and to all Ohlone people, past and present. Dr. Kirschenbaum will now read Maryland's.
Every community owes its existence and strength to the generations before them around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to migrate from their homes in hopes of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. At the Center for Literary and Comparative Studies and Book Lab, we believe it is important to create dialogue to honor those who have been historically and systematically disenfranchised. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere. We are on indigenous land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. We pay respects to Piscataway elders and ancestors. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today.
Thank you, Dr. Kirschenbaum. I'd like to now introduce our first speaker, Victoria Law. She is a journalist and author who writes about the intersections between mass incarceration, gender, and resistance. She is author of 3 books: Resistance Behind Bars, The Struggles of Incarcerated Women, which was published by PM Press in 2009, and also Prison by Any Other Name, The Harmful Consequences of Popular Reform, was published by New Press last year in 2020. Thirdly, her most recent book is entitled Prisons Make Us Safer, in quotes, and 20 Other Myths About Mass Incarceration, and is forthcoming from Beacon Press this April, so soon. She is also co-editor of the book Don't Leave Your Friends Behind: Concrete Ways to Support Families in Social Justice Movements and Communities, published by PM Press in 2012. I'm most familiar with her work as the editor of the zine Tenacious, Art and Writings by Women in Prison, a project that she recently concluded after serving as editor and then some since 2003. At this time, please join me in welcoming Victoria Law.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for hosting this. Greetings from Lenape land, AKA New York City. And I am thrilled to be here. I am not a printmaker or visual artist, so I was a little surprised when I first got the invitation to participate in this, but I love the ways in which visual art contributes to resistance and reminds us and reaffirms what we are doing, especially in the face of so many daunting challenges. So I received this beautiful print booklet, Love is Key, from Sarah Matthews. And one of the first things that struck me about it was just the colors. Even before I could read the fact that it said love, I just looked at it and I was like, wow, this is so beautiful and colorful. And you all can't see this through the camera, and I have no idea what this paper is, but it is super soft. And I was joking before we started the actual event that I really want a shirt or a scarf made out of this to just wear all the time. So that's the materiality of this print object. And one of the things that struck me, or 2 things that struck me, is one, I got this and I immediately was thinking, I want to send this in to a woman in prison after this event is over. And then I realized that I cannot, because so many prisons don't allow color through their mailroom, because there is this idea that somehow somebody will sneak drugs into the inks and print out, or somehow soak the card or soak the print in some sort of illicit substance and send it in through the mail, as opposed to thinking that perhaps the prison staff smuggle in actual drugs. And if you have $30 to buy drugs to smoke, are you going to smoke the card, or are you going to actually smoke the unadulterated drugs? So that was the thing that really made me sad, is that I would not be able to share this with somebody else whose entire wall is just gray and brown and drab. And then the other thing that I thought of is that I am an Asian American woman. Sarah Matthews is a Black woman. And in this time, particularly, for there to be a Black printmaker sending an Asian American woman a zine that says love, and love is key, and love, there's just love saturated on every page at a time when we see anti-Asian violence being on the rise. We see, this violence frightening so many vulnerable Asian American peoples into staying home, being fearful of their neighbors. Also at a time when we see police violence and law enforcement violence really coming down hard on Black communities, which it has always done. This is not new, but we see these attacks on Asian American communities and Asian American elders pitting these two communities against each other, because people are calling for defunding the police, stopping an end to racial profiling and racial violence against Black people and brown people and people of color. And at the same time, we're seeing these attacks and subsequent calls for safety, and thinking about what safety means and how police don't keep us safe. But if we don't have other opportunities and other options for people to stay safe, they fall back on what they know. So all of this came to mind when I was looking at this, is looking at all of this. And then also thinking about, and I don't know if this was a pairing that was intentional way back when, if people thought, let's pair these two up and see what comes of this, or if this was purely coincidental. But it also reminded me of the historic and frequently forgotten histories and herstories of Afro-Asian solidarities that have happened through political organizing and through political communities. And I pulled up a piece, and I'll put the link in the chat afterwards, by the Asian American Feminist Collective and the Black Women Radicals Collective, that was published last April when there were attacks on Asian Americans and Asian American communities, and also attacks on Black people and Black communities. And I'm just going to read you a very short excerpt of this that says, "We recognize that our histories are intrinsically tied together. Looking back to histories of Black and Asian American feminist solidarities and movement work can help us think about how organizing our struggles towards liberation are connected, and how we create radical change together, especially in our long-standing fights against carceral systems of empire, war, and capitalism." Calls made by the Combahee River Collective, 1974 to 1980, and the Third World Women's Alliance, 1968 to 1980, to confront and examine patriarchy within our movements and cultures, centered understandings of solidarity through engaging difference. For example, the Third World Women's Alliance, which emerged out of the Black Women's Liberation Committee, drew upon different experiences of gendered exploitation and colonialism to show us how building feminist solidarity was a vital part of a revolutionary internationalist movement, signaling that the struggle against imperialism, racism, and patriarchy was a shared one. As we situate this history in the present, we have to reckon with the decades that have since passed, decades that have led to shifting politics around class and race, and a more nuanced vision of how imperialism can be perpetuated by countries once in the Third World Alliance. Those of us in the present must reckon with the imbalances of prestige, power, wealth, authority, and value, and tracing the trajectories of that imbalance. This legacy of Black Asian feminist solidarity is alive and well today in the intertwining of movements for abolition, decolonization and demilitarization, disability justice, reproductive justice, domestic worker, sex worker, and labor rights, environmental justice, and the myriad ways our radical world transformation come together. To be in relationship and in solidarity with each other, we must attend to how power differentially operates within movement building. Building and sustaining solidarities is difficult, uncomfortable, and messy but critical work, and the bonds that are created are often both precarious and precious. We do not wish to erase our complicated histories as they have catapulted us into this present moment and confirmed our commitments to dismantling the systems of power that have forced us into scarcity mindsets and fighting one another for scraps. And this is everything that this beautiful handheld booklet brought up to me, when I got it. And then finally, we have to remember that even though my bad in need of glasses eyes did not see it at first, it is an affirmation. There is the word love on every page. And it is an affirmation against this divide, against this forced division. There's an affirmation of love. But it's also a reminder, especially as women of color, as mothers of color. I read on your website that you have children. I have a child. That as women of color and as mothers of color, as artists of color, it's a reminder that life is love. It is not just toil. It is not just struggle. It is not just, going day to day to take care of each other and pay the bills and deal with all the responsibilities, but that life is love. So thank you for this.
Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Sarah Matthews, who was Victoria Law's printing partner, printing buddy. Sarah Matthews is a full-time print artist and currently teaches bookbinding and printmaking at Pyramid Atlantic Art Center and Minnesota Book Arts Center. I first got to know Sarah's work, I admit, by watching her YouTube channel, Sarah Be Me, which is addictive. It is a rich collection of videos that demonstrate how to make prints and bound art, and I immediately wanted to try her techniques. And more importantly, I felt that I could. In these demos, you can see the bold colors, patterns, and craft that are the signatures of her fine artwork in printing and bookbinding that she is renowned for. Her work is a part of several permanent collections in the US, including Yale's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, George Washington University's Gelman Library, the University of Puget Sound, and Samford University. Her CV contains an impressive list of past, present, and upcoming exhibitions nationwide, including the Illustrated Accordion at the Kalamazoo Book Art Center, Letterpress from Industry to Art, hosted by University Art Galleries at the University of South Dakota, the 2021 Visionary Women exhibition at the Columbia Art Center Window Gallery in Columbia, Maryland, and Ink It, Contemporary Print Practices, hosted by the Blackrock Center for the Arts in Germantown, Maryland. Please welcome printmaker and book artist, Sarah Matthews.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here. I wanted to thank SCU and UMD for inviting me for this panelist talk. Mail art has been something that has become one of my favorite things. So I am so excited to share this with Victoria. And Victoria, let me tell you, when you were reading, I was tearing up. I really appreciate your response to my artwork. You got it. You nailed it on the head, and I appreciate you for joining me. So let me share my screen. So I will be responding to Victoria's book, Tenacious. She was the editor of the Tenacious Art and Writings by Women in Prison since 2003. And I wanted to thank her for using her gifts to help others use their voice. So Tenacious was started in 2002 by incarcerated women at Oregon Coffee Creek Correctional Facility. One of the first stories that resonated with me was the Prisoners Not Lives Matter by Acapella. She didn't want to use her name in this particular book because she didn't want to be retaliated against. But she tells a story of what it was like being exposed to multiple sicknesses back to back in a federal prison in 2019. This is even before the COVID pandemic. She talks about being diagnosed with pneumonia, while others tested positive for Legionella, and which is a waterborne bacteria, and Pontiac fever. Acapella also says that her and others applied to be transferred to home confinement, and all their requests were denied, even through the pandemic. And the one quote that struck me the most was when she said, "The currently prevailing legal opinion that the threat of COVID-19 is not compelling enough reason for compassionate release. Guess one has to die first." The second one that resonated with me was the unable to say goodbye during a prison pandemic. And this was written by Tiffany Holmes. And she's talking about her friend Angel, who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So this woman was locked up for 45 years. I am 44 years old. 45 years, and she was only 66 years old. She was too ill to do chemotherapy, so the doctors didn't give her much time to live. So Tiffany and her friends were concerned that Angel would die without any comfort care or with anyone holding her hand. And that's exactly what happened. No matter what they did, no matter what they said, no matter how they requested it, they were not allowed to be there for her in her final moments. And when you think about now today, there are people out there right now dying without having someone there to comfort them. And so, my heart goes out to Angel and all her friends to have to endure that. Then the third one resonated with me is this artwork by Anna Jo Vanderford. And it's a list of names of people who have been killed. They're African-American people who have been killed, which includes George Floyd. And it points out, that it took 8 minutes and 46 seconds for this poor man to pass away due to police violence over a matter of $20. And not knowing this, this is like right on time, because last week, 3 young boys were shot. 2 were killed. One is critically injured. He's in the hospital. Joshua Cole Cooper, Andy Reddick, and Jalen Rice is the one that's in the hospital. They were shot just from an altercation at a gas station, and for no reason whatsoever. No reason whatsoever. And it's just astounding how long the list keeps getting. Every time you look at the news, there's another death. So every poem, every story, every artwork that was in this book is completely compelling. Like I was saying before we started, I sat here at my desk and read it cover to cover in one sitting because it was just so compelling, and I just wanted to keep reading word for word. And I have to say that I am forever changed by it because I see myself in the people that were in this book. I see myself, I could have been any of those ladies. I can't help but see the lack of resources that were afforded them, the justice, compassion for these women, trans women and trans men, to not have access to soap, water, cleaning supplies, masks, to be in closed quarters with other inmates with no social distancing, to be in constant fear of sexual assault or sexual abuse. Tenacious is the right word. These women, these trans women, these trans men are tenacious. They are persisting in existence. They are determined. They are holding on. So I like to read the colophon when I'm looking at any type of artwork or artist book. I'll read the colophon last. And the one thing that struck me the most, it says, this is the last issue of Tenacious, the last one. And as a book artist, a book binder, and even, learning conservatism when I was taking my art degree at Corcoran College of Art and Design, I wanted to, save it. It was, precious to me after reading it. So I immediately bound it into a book using the 7-hole pamphlet stitch. And I picked out some papers for the inside covers, and I bound it into the book. And then that word tenacious kept ringing in my ear and in my brain. I just couldn't get it out of my brain. So I wrote it down, and then I, started the process of making a stamp. So I carved out the word tenacious, and then I did my test print of tenacious, and then I proceeded to print the cover. So I started with white on the black background, using my gel press and speedball printmaking ink. And then I moved on to adding yellow because it's a striking color on the background of black and white. And then this is what it looks like completed. I just did one cover because I wanted your eyes to be able to rest on that black and then go back to the tenacious and go back and forth when you're viewing it from the back of the book. So that is it. Thank you for your time and your patience. And I really appreciate this whole experience. And I look forward to doing something like this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Victoria. This was a wonderful exchange, and it was everything that we had hoped for out of this kind of event. And so I feel very moved right now. So thank you so much. My name is Kathy Aoki, and I'm a professor of studio art in the Department of Art and Art History at Santa Clara University. And I'm honored today to introduce Rio Yañez. From the moment Rio Yañez was conceived in an artist studio, his fate as an artist was sealed. Born and raised in San Francisco's Mission District, Yañez is a curator, photographer, and graphic artist. As a curator, he has had frequent collaborations with his father, Rene Yañez, and the pair developed exhibits together from 2005 until Rene's passing in 2018. Rio has exhibited in cities ranging from San Francisco to Tokyo, and his art practice includes digital portraits, comics, 3D stereographic art, purikura, which is Japanese photo booth collaborations, and tortillas printed with subversive messages. And this is because Yañez is one of the founding members of the Great Tortilla Conspiracy, which describes itself as the world's most dangerous tortilla art collective. With his father, Rene Yañez, and art collaborators Josh Sanses and Art Hazelwood, Rio has printed, performed, and distributed the Great Tortilla Conspiracy's digestible satire at venues ranging from street corners to established fine art museums. This year, the Great Tortilla Conspiracy figures in the exhibition Printing the Revolution, the Rise and Impact of Chicano Graphics, 1965 to Now, which is currently at the Smithsonian American Art Museum and hopefully will reopen soon. Please join me in welcoming artist and activist Rio Yañez.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Sarah and Victoria, it was so amazing and so wonderful to hear you speak about your work and about each other's work. I would like to acknowledge Amy Suo Wu, who is unfortunately not here, but I have not received her print exchange, but I was so thrilled to hear about it and kind of fascinated. Her work is what she was sending is I believe I'm saying it right, cardon gris. It's kind of a text decoder device. So one of the many projects she's done, and I believe she's called it crypto printmaking. She sends postcards with instructions. They're kind of creatively designed postcards. Let me share my screen. So Amy sends these postcards, and in the postcard, there's instructions on where and how to cut out holes in the postcards themselves. And apparently the postcards have a URL that they point you to where you line up the postcards with certain markers on the website, and it actually displays messages. So as someone who like grew up like loving like the decoder ring prizes that were sometimes in cereal boxes, or if you chewed enough Bazooka Joe gum, you could send away for a decoder ring. I was so excited to see this, and I'm sad I haven't received it, but I was just very, very intrigued, and it's just kind of intellectually stimulated that there is this print process of actually, using mail to send something out and having it be both like a physical media that you handle and you have to cut holes out of, but actually interacting with a computer screen, and the idea that you can actually decode words and meaning by holding this postcard up to the screen. So Amy, wherever you are, I'm so excited to receive these postcards and to kind of get a little bit closer to your crypto printmaking and the messages you're conveying with it. So I'm very, very much looking forward to that. What I have sent Amy in exchange is a tortilla. And so, as mentioned, I'm a founding member of the Great Tortilla Conspiracy. We are a tortilla printmaking collective, and I'm gonna show just a couple of images of some tortillas I've done, but also touch on the history of the medium, because tortilla art has been around for over 50 years at this point. So this is the print that I sent Amy. This is an image printed directly on a tortilla. And well, to give a little background on it, I was born and raised in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area. I identify as a Chicano, a Mexican American. And being a teenager in the 90s in California, there was just so much anti-immigrant sentiment. The voters passed something called Proposition 187, which barred undocumented students from being taught in class, and it meant teachers were required to report undocumented students in their classroom. And one kind of life-changing experience I had as a teenager was when my mom took me to her hometown of San Diego, California. And on the border, San Diego is on the border of Mexico. And along the freeways in San Diego, you would see this sign of these three figures, kind of a adult man and woman running and grabbing a child by the arm and kind of dragging her. And you'd see these on freeways and in traffic, and it was, essentially warning people to be prepared to brake if someone was crossing the border and there was a family kind of coming through the road. And it was just kind of eye-opening experience to see that, and kind of see that at the peak of the anti-immigrant sentiment in California at the time. And so with the Great Tortilla Conspiracy, there's 4 kind of core members of us, and we print our images and our political graphics on tortillas. And so I wanted to, especially as Trump came into power, I wanted to do something to kind of honor these figures, these parents who are taking their child through dangerous territory in the hopes of a better life. And so, typically I would say the sign was meant to kind of deride immigrants. And so I kind of wanted to reclaim it. So I just, we printed it on a tortilla from a place of love and support and solidarity. And yeah, this has been the work of our collective. I'm gonna just show a couple of images on kind of the roots and the short history of tortilla art, and kind of how the medium has evolved to this point. So tortilla art starts in the 60s by artist Jose Montoya, who would burn images onto tortillas by heating a wire hanger. He would take a wire hanger, undo it, heat it, and then press and burn images into tortillas with it. Here's kind of an image of a face that he burned into a tortilla. And a lot of this is very specific to Mexicans and Mexican Americans. There's a history of apparitions appearing on tortillas, of Catholic saints appearing on tortillas, and there's a lot of kind of folklore around it. So in playing with that, like he started printing images on tortillas, and that was followed by my father, who was one of the very first artists to have a residency with Xerox in the late 70s. And with that, he would buy tortillas from the store and lay images on top of them within the Xerox machine itself, and create these tortilla prints. Much later in 2006, the tortilla conspiracy came together. We had Joss Sands, who's one of our members, had been experimenting printing on tortillas, and invited my father and I to join him. And so the first kind of prints we made were actually using transfer paper, heat transfer paper. Think like iron-on t-shirt transfers. This was a design I did of Hello Kitty learning about Chicano art. And this was kind of the first wave of tortilla art that we produced by using heat transfers on tortillas. And we would show up and give them out at events. And the question we always got was, can I eat it? And we had to tell everyone no, because it's a thin layer of plastic melted on the tortilla. But that question of eating it kind of pushed us forward to experiment a little. So the next step was to actually start printing and figuring out how to silkscreen directly on a tortilla with edible inks. And it took a couple of years of experimenting, of trial and error, but we managed to come up with a formula. And the formula is Hershey's chocolate syrup and a little bit of black food coloring. And that has produced a perfect ink with the viscosity for printing through a silk screen. And so from there, we were able to print directly, silkscreen directly on tortillas. And what we would do is throw them on a grill to kind of dry the ink. We would just have like a little portable grill, and we'd cook them and dry the ink on them and hand them out. And, I think to us, it's very subversive that, you know, the art we're doing is not collectible. It's not meant for gallery display. It's art that is meant to feed people, to sustain people. And, you know, we always give them out at public events. So this was our way of feeding people. So sometimes we would just hand out the tortillas. Sometimes we would get cheese and make quesadillas and hand them out to eat. But I think we were really enamored of the impermanence of everything. So from there, you know, this is a more recent one that I've done. This was in honor of Esta Noche, which was it was a Latino and Mexican gay bar in San Francisco's Mission District, and it was the last queer space kind of specifically for Latinos in San Francisco. And when it was closed and converted into a wine bar, there was a lot of activism around it. So we handed out these Esta Noche tortillas in front of the new business location. So we've experimented with tortillas in different ways of presenting the work. Here is a mosaic that was produced using printed tortillas, but kind of in different shapes and configurations. In honoring the role of tortillas in apparitions in Mexican and Mexican American cultures, we created this mosaic of tortillas that, if you look at it from a distance, it's a portrait of Jesus Christ. And so we've done different experiments. I did want to share this last one. We broke from our formula very briefly when we were invited to the Oakland Museum in California. And the Oakland Museum is right across the street from the Alameda Courthouse, which is where so much activity around the Black Panther Party in the Bay Area took place. And being in the museum, we wanted to honor the work of the Panthers. And so we ended up silk screening Huey Newton on hundreds and hundreds of Fig Newtons and gave them out at the museum during a youth art event. You know, we have a lot of fun with it. You know, it's a way to both kind of honor and just, you know, present work that is both political, but also work that feeds people. And that is, like I said, it's not collectible. It's not meant really for display. It is work to get across the message and to provide sustenance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rio. That was great. We have Amy Suo Wu here today. I'm thrilled to introduce her. Amy is coming to us from the Netherlands, which I feel like rightly explains the pop-up now, which we're so thrilled about.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's no worries. We are so happy to see you. So, and I will give you a little bit of time now by introducing you. Amy Suo Wu is a self-described chimera working at the intersection of art, design, and media research. Since 2015, she has researched, revitalized, and adapted projects focused on steganography, which is not to be confused with stenography. So stenography is the art of taking verbatim shorthand notes. But on the other hand, steganography involves messages that conceal themselves, such as writing with lemon juice, to be revealed later by the application of heat. Wu's steganographic practices include hiding techniques, evasion tactics, and covert communication as acts of protection, survival, and resistance in the face of oppression and violence. This research is now published in her 2019 book, The Cookbook of Invisible Writing, from Onomatopoeia Press. Wu's most recent interest and practice circles around literal and metaphorical approaches of mending, design as remittance and self-fulfilling prophecy, and how text and textile might be woven together to form embodied publishing. Please join me in welcoming artist, educator, and scholar, Amy Suo Wu.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. So yeah, my name is Amy Suo Wu, and for the last 5 years, I have been indeed immersed in the world of secret communication, otherwise known as steganography. I'll just browse through my website. So indeed, I have been fascinated by hiding techniques and evasion tactics, covert ways to express oneself, secret writing co-opted to protect from harm in the face of threat and as acts of resistances and in the face of oppression. And so in this journey, I've been collecting similar stories of resistances. Looking back, I think I was amassing a personal trove of tactics as if to remind myself that that resistance at whatever scale is possible. Before I go on, I guess I would just say a little bit about steganography and what this research has been about and what it means to me. So steganography is a form of secret writing that conceals private information within public information. So what steganography is really the art and science of hiding in plain sight, otherwise known as camouflaged communication. So I have been drawn to these various tactics and techniques in the beginning of my research as techno-political inquiries into how analog steganography might subvert digital surveillance and bypass censorship, which then gradually shifted to focus more on invisibility tactics used by marginalized cultures and social movements. And then towards the end of this very long research, through this process of engaging with steganography as the politics and methodology of revealing and concealing, I actually uncovered a deeper reason why I was gripped by this subject of secret communication. And then I start delving into notions of embodied invisibility, cultural assimilation, and things that I hid away from my own kind of consciousness. So then it slowly kind of developed into a more kind of personal research, but I won't be going into that today. But what I will be going in today is the project. Well, first of all, I'll talk a little bit about this cookbook. So this cookbook is really a kind of culmination of all this research that I had been doing in the last 5 years. And really it is a kind of recipe book. It's a puzzle book, it's a coloring book. It's also a portfolio. So it kind of showcases all the kind of practices and the projects and the workshops that I conducted during this research. The cookbook is also a recipe book with invisible ink recipes that I've collected over the years. Some date as far back to the 1600s. The invisible ink book, it's also a coloring book for you to test out and try invisible ink on the pages. So I designed it in a way that that uses specific paper that absorbs the DIY invisible inks, which are generally water-based. So they're thick enough to kind of to absorb it without showing water damage, which is important if you're going to use invisible ink. It's also a puzzle book, as I mentioned. So each chapter has a kind of encoded message illustrated by myself as well. So yeah, that it showcases different techniques as well. So I also try to not just talk about it, but also embody it and share it and show it and perform it in the style of illustration. It also has an essay on the colonial history and the modern day applications of surveillance technologies. And as I mentioned, also, my practice that revolves around the information that I had been working very closely for the last 5 years. So, here's another puzzle in the form of illustration. So that's the kind of, let's say, backbone of this research. Everything has come together in this particular book. But I guess I'll speak a little bit more about the work that I sent to Rio today. And the work is called Greetings from the Invisible Borderlands. I'll just show you that page so you have some visual reference. So Greetings from the Invisible Borderlands is kind of created in this 5-year research, also with the subject of steganography. And what it is, it's a series of messages that experiment with analog steganography for contemporary online surveyed mediascapes. So this work I made, I believe, in 2016, but I made a second one in 2017 and a third one in 2018, and I sent all 3 to Rio. Did you actually get it? No, oh no.
No, I'm sorry, Amy. It hasn't come yet, but I'm so excited to receive it.
Oh, that's terrible. Oh, I don't know what happened. Anyway, I'll send it to you again. I sent it like a month ago, but maybe the postal got confused. Postal service got confused. Oh well. So this work, the postcards is a series of exercises that tries to reveal the cardon grill, which is a very old, a 400-year-old, in fact, method of writing secret messages using using a grid made out of cardboard with holes cut into it. And so when the grill is placed over a larger message, the holes should line up and specific letters in the message reveal the hidden message underneath it. So the postcard is really in fact the grill, and the key that unlocks the embedded message is on Google Maps. So by using the 2 separate communication channel, which is basically the postal service and the internet, the work tries to maneuver within the invisible borderlands, what I call the uncharted cracks between online and offline communication. And so, inspired by network-based experiments like mail art and net art, I tried to kind of explore alternative and untraceable forms of communication. And so at the time, I was really exploring how people could communicate with limitation. And I use this as a playful way to kind of, 1, educate people of such older techniques that could be resuscitated, and 2, to really try to attempt to perform it. So that gives a little bit of a general overview of the work. Should I also comment on Rio's work, or do we move on?
You have about a minute left if you want to comment on Rio, but we should wrap up.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'll just stop sharing my screen. Yeah, well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Rio. I got your tortilla. I really loved. I only caught like the last few minutes of your presentation, but I really love how the art feeds the soul, the family feeds the heart, and the food feeds the body. And I really love how they all kind of come together on this impermanent, ephemeral, but nourishing piece of surface. And yeah, how all of these three things nourish, and in this particular way, it's also political. So thank you very much. Yeah. I also noticed there were lots of Valentine cards on your blog, and I loved how loving it was. Also in line with this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. At this point, I want to remind our attendees that we're going to turn to a sort of a discussion and a Q&A session now for the last half hour of our time together, which is it's a really good stretch of time for us to interrogate one another's prints and ask questions. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. And then I will read it for you. But I thought I would just open the floor and say this is a great moment for all of the printers to talk to one another. If you have questions for someone who's in a different pairing.
I have a question. So Rio, you hand out the tortilla art to people on the street, as part of events. I'm wondering what the reactions are to your work when you hand people tortillas, and then when you did the Oakland Museum Huey Newton Fig Newtons at a youth event, I was wondering what kind of reactions you got, because also having a child of my own and having the child and her friends coming in and out of the house, I know that sometimes, depending on the age, maybe the food is more important than the message, but was wondering what kinds of reactions you got when you're handing them Fig Newtons. Was it like, oh, what's this? Or was it like,
I think we always try and be a little subversive and just a little naughty with like what we're actually doing. And I think we were just excited to be in such a place that had such historical relevance and personal meaning for all of us. There was a Black Panther exhibit at the time. So it was programming around a Black Panther exhibit at the museum. And so we, tortillas, because it was a youth event, tortillas are great, but we wanted something a little sweet. I know it was done at a time where maybe there was like a little less awareness of, dietary restrictions and things like that. But we were just like, let's get 1,000 Fig Newtons and just start printing. And, part of it is that people watch us print. We're there, we have 2 folding tables, and the silk screen is there. So we're there and we're printing in person. So everyone sees the process. There's no real mystery behind it. So there's often a lot of curiosity when we print and we hand things out. Specifically with the Fig Newtons, a lot of the youth, some kind of made the connection, some didn't, but the parents were very intrigued and excited. And, there is a performative aspect to actually distributing the work and handing it out to folks. Sometimes people have wondered if we're in some like weird religious cult because we're in a public space trying to hand out food and there's a message on it. And I think once people actually see and kind of take in the political graphics, then it kind of clicks a little bit more as art and as something to not be as wary of. It is a very kind of performative thing to actually interact with folks and to hand it out and to convince people to take it sometimes, because people, depending on the context and the location and the situation, can be very skeptical or untrusting of strangers, trying to feed them. And yes, we often get questions wondering if we're recruiting for a religious organization. It's we never quite know what the landscape will be until we're actually set up and running and printing and handing things out.
To the point of subversiveness, Aaron Bartlett is asking a question that sort of is trying to tie together the different ways that your projects are all subversive in one way or another. So Rio, you just mentioned how your project kind of does that with food. But I think Aaron is asking how the nature of hiding in Amy's work resonates with Victoria's comments on the limitations of what can be sent into prison and what cannot. And Sarah, I would love to know how, if you feel like your work has a subversive element to it, or if you feel like it does not.
Okay, so I like to sneak subversive things into some of my work, because sometimes people can look at my work and say, oh, this is so cheerful, this is so nice. And then there's the ones that I make that gives you the punch in the forehead. I actually made one for a gallery that basically it was a woodblock print about the swimming pool. So it's like white only swimming pool on the thing. And so I carved it out onto the wood, printed it, and then it was displayed at this gallery. And the title of it was Just Another Wall. And this was just during the time when Trump was building the wall, supposed wall, that how walls are divisive and how that they change the atmosphere and bring on hate against, certain people. So I wanted to call that out. So I do have some art, some pieces of art that are like that are like give you a 1-2 punch. I have a flag book that had just like the young lady with the names of the people who have died through police brutality. I actually made a flag book with each name and put that in a show. So I like doing that because people need to know. I guess to me, I feel like I'm putting a mirror up to you so you can see. The last thing I want to say is there was a show at Pyramid Atlantic and it was about voting. And so I printed out vote in different things, different layers, just like I normally do, but I put it in a frame with a mirror. So when you walk up to it, you see yourself. And that was the whole point. I don't know if people got that, but that was my intent in that piece of artwork.
To answer, the part of Aaron's question that was directed at me, I mean, I see writing, from prison as an act of resistance. As I was saying earlier, I was very sad that I cannot send Sarah's beautiful art into prison because they won't allow it in, because they're going to say that it's because of all these anti-drug smuggling efforts and blah, 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 blah. But really what it is you're not allowing things that are beautiful in. There is no joy. There is no, there are no things that bring cheer and comfort and solace to people's daily grinds inside. But just as I cannot send some things in, writings about what is happening inside prisons are ways of resistance and highlighting many of these injustices. I mean, that was the point of putting together Tenacious, was women being able to get their voices out, because just as prison walls keep us from being able to send beautiful things that just say love, they don't say overthrow the prison system, set fire to the guards, and break out. It says love. And just as prison walls keep that from going in, they also keep other messages from coming out. So I see writing as an act of resistance, writing and illustrating these kinds of injustices. I see, somebody being able to draw, a cell and, like bars, and just this idea of time as, an act of resistance. The George Floyd drawing that Sarah highlighted in her presentation as this act of, inside, outside solidarity, to say we see what is happening inside, and this is what, this is our reaction to it. So yes, it is, an act of resistance, because otherwise how would we know what is happening in there? Because if you ask, prison press people, hey, like, to give an example, in Texas, you know, where millions of people lost power and water and, you know, pipes froze and everything else. Of course, the same thing happened in prisons across the country. And people who were in prisons were able to get the word out sometimes. And they described, I got, you know, messages from 4 separate women saying, you know, we are in a housing unit, there's been no heat, there's been no hot water. At least we have power, but because there's been no heat, some of the pipes have frozen, some of them have burst. They had to turn the water off, but before that there was like sewage coming in, you know, everywhere. But they turn the water off, and we live in a housing unit of 300 women, all of whom at some point have to use the bathroom. That is a really disgusting prospect. But when, you know, I asked the prison officials, you know, can you comment on this? Because my full-time job is as a journalist reporting on prisons. They said, no, absolutely not. You know, like the water was turned off briefly to deal with a burst pipe, but they all had access to water. The toilets were able to flush all the time. And that is not what I was told repeatedly by different women. And this was not what other people who were in touch with people in that prison. So unless there was a mass conspiracy where some gigantic portion of these 300 women all decided to write different people to tell this same story, it is pretty, you know, it is pretty much, you know, like, yes, this is a story that would not have gotten out had it not been for, you know, for women inside being able to speak and to write.
Do you want to also comment on the issue of subversion that Erin was talking about?
Yeah, so I suppose my research into steganography and secret writing was really about collecting and understanding these subversion tactics, these tactics of invisibility, where various minority groups co-opted them to be able to express what they needed to say in particular circumstances. And so a lot of the invisible ink recipes, they actually were throughout history used by prisoners. Mm-hmm. So as early as 1600s and even longer, there were recipes of lemon juice, recipes of even bodily fluid, because if you were caught with, let's say, substances that were not allowed to come in and out, you could be, you know, further punished or reprimanded in a serious way. So I think a lot of the prisoners around World War I, they started to use semen and urine and saliva, all of these things that one couldn't get incriminated or like further punished for because they were on your body. And there was even, I think, a unit in World War I in England that tried to somehow experiment with bodily fluid. Yeah, so invisible ink really, a lot of these techniques have been innovated by prisoners or communities in which they could not speak freely. I'm just thinking there's so many there. I mean, and the whole book is basically a kind of showcase of all the rich wealth of all these different languages that have come about because of certain restrictions of freedom of speech. Should I continue on?
Only if you want to. We have a lot of really great questions in the Q&A and in the chat that have just started pouring in, actually, which is kind of exciting. So I'm going to group 2 of them together, and this is a question for everybody. So each of you, I'm quoting here, each of you beautifully balances whimsy and provocation, the personal and the political, pleasure and discomfort. And also art and activism is the other binary that's mentioned in an adjacent question. Can you speak about your process of creating art that bridges forces we typically think of as in opposition?
So when the George Floyd situation happened, that was right around the time, I think another death had happened that within the same couple of weeks. And I didn't make anything for at least 2 weeks as a result of that situation. Like I sat down and watched that video. I wanted to see what happened to this man. And there was no provocation that said that it was okay for this to happen. So I carved out a Black Lives Matter stamp and just printed it on everything. I printed it on a quilt. I printed it on paper. I made it different sizes. I put it on shirts. Because I saw my father, my brother, my cousins in his face, you know what I mean? And I had no, other choice but to voice how I was feeling, that our lives matter. Everyone's lives matter. We all know this, but disproportionately, we've been killed for no reason. And so I had to shout it out from the rooftops, and I posted it on everything, and could care less what anyone thought. And whatever retaliation was going to happen, I could care less, because people needed to know how I felt about it, and I did it through my art. And so Amos Paul Kennedy said, and he's my favorite artist in the world, he said, art is activism, activism is art. So they're all one and the same.
I think for me in working with our collective and creating tortilla art, there's definitely a context is very important. Like in the images I showed, there was the image of Huey Newton, who we wanted to honor, Cesar Chavez, who we were honoring at a street fair and just handing out Cesar Chavez tortillas. But we also do like to be very provocative. Right now in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, and for I would say the last maybe 10 years, there's been a lot of activist work about who the donors and board members are for major arts institutions, specifically museums. And so we were invited to a museum in San Francisco for a private event, and to hand out tortillas at this private event. And so when we were invited, we were like, well, we have to do something. Like we can't just like take a gig and not really like it's not the context in which we would normally produce our work and distribute our work. So, and it just happened to coincide with the passing of former First Lady Nancy Reagan, whose political legacy of her and her husband, Ronald Reagan, both in the United States, but also very specifically in California, is still being felt this day. So, and keeping in mind just like a lot of the activist work around pushing back and questioning the board members, the major donors of these institutions, we decided to do those Nancy Reagan in Hell commemorative tortillas. And we did get in some trouble for it. But it was, I think it is a tricky balance, and it is a lot to think about, and I think it's just knowing our audience. And sometimes we really know our audience, and sometimes we are taking a guess or just doing what we want to do. And it is a very tricky balance.
So I have a question for Victoria. Have you thought about making pamphlets or other forms of print to address the recent spike in Asian American violence?
I haven't, because I feel like there are people who are doing this critical work, thinking, bridge building, organizing, that have already been doing this. And what I would prefer to do is to like lift up their voices. So earlier I read, a part of the letter from Black Women Radicals and the Asian American Feminist Collective, that has been doing a lot of work, including making zines that are available online or for, that can be downloaded so people can read them. There's another Asian American writer named Michelle Kim that's been doing a lot of work around this. So rather than me adding my voice to this, I prefer to, read, uplift, share the voices that are already there. What I would, be very interested in, and if folks know of people, like throw them in the Q&A or the chat, is, Black African and African American writers who are also talking about like this, spike in anti-Asian violence and how to address this as well. So that way it doesn't seem like this one-sided, conversation, because we know that, like just because attacks happen, it's not necessarily like you paint an entire, race of people with that. But this falls into the media tropes that people have been fed via Law and Order and cops and I don't know, whatever other shows people have, like that, like you paint an entire race and then suddenly we fall back into these, narratives of who's dangerous and who's not. So, I personally am not interested in creating something of my own, but instead lifting up those voices to say, like, when people say, why are so many Black people or brown people attacking Asian people, to say like, but in these communities, here are the people who are doing that work too, to be like, Asian people are not your enemy. We should not have oppressed person punching oppressed person. Like what about these systems of white supremacy that keep us all down? So rather than putting my time and energy into recreating what other people are doing so wonderfully and beautifully already, I would prefer to just, share what they are doing.
And to build off of that, there are several questions in the queue on the theme of preservation and archiving, and which also leads me to think what's next for all of you, right? So there's a question about, do you share your work with specific libraries to archive and preserve that work? And what are your upcoming projects? And this is to everybody.
As a book artist, that's just basically the basis of what I do, is to get my work in libraries and to be saved. So, I mean, I recently got a couple of my flag books into the Cynthia Sears collection, which is amazing. I'm working with Vamp and Tramp to kind of get some of my other books out. But I think what I tend to do is focus on the work that I really want to do. And if someone buys it, or if it ends up someplace where someone is going to save it and maintain it, that's the, the best possible circumstance. So, I mean, that's not my forefront of my mind when I'm making things, but I know that all the work that I'm putting out there is going to good homes, whether they're at a library or someone's personal collection. So that's just the nature of being a book artist.
There was an interesting, I don't remember if it was in the chat or the Q&A, where somebody said that they actually used to work at the women's prison in Minnesota, where Anna Jo Vanderford did this beautiful, depiction. And so they suggested that I contact the librarian there about possibly donating Sarah's wonderful piece to see if we could get it in that way. So that's like an interesting, sort of like, oh, maybe there's a possibility that at least in one prison, women will be able to see and touch your work. For Tenacious, it's in, I don't know, a bunch of academic libraries. I am not very good at promotion or publicity or remembering to tell people that things are out. I think last month, like I put this last issue out, the pandemic issue last summer. I don't think I ever told anybody that I did. So Kirstyn last month emailed me and said, so I understand from Sarah that you have this issue. I'm like, oh yeah, I have a box of those sitting in my house. So my approach is kind of scattershot. People learn about Tenacious, and then sometimes academic librarians will say, hi, we would like to have this in our collection. Can you please send us copies? So it is there are various issues in different academic libraries around the country. I think if you go to like WorldCat, you could probably find out which ones. It's extremely scattershot. It might be like somebody might have like issues 3, 6, 22, and 30, because that's what I remembered to send them. But like for me, it's also a way for people to be able to read about the experiences and to read the voices, the direct voices of women in prison with very little interference from me. Like, yes, I will correct, egregious misspellings, or, ask people to clarify things. Like, so instead of it was terrible, it's like, what is it? And can you describe terrible? Like, what was terrible? Was it like the smell from this toilet that 300 women shit in that couldn't be flushed was, overpowering and made me want to vomit, rather than it was terrible. But otherwise, it's not me interpreting or somebody else interpreting their voices and experiences. It's them doing this.
So in terms of my printmaking work, as Kathy mentioned, our collective is part of the Latino arts exhibit at the Smithsonian, which is up but is yet to kind of publicly debut because of the pandemic. It's always kind of an odd process when an institution or an organization wants to show our work. I have a tortilla here. So the tricky thing about working with tortillas, let's see, there we go. It's a portrait of my father in a Mexican wrestling mask. When he passed away, we actually printed these at his funeral and gave them away. And so I think it's kind of shocking for people to hear sometimes about how processed store-bought tortillas are, and how much preservatives are in even seemingly organic tortillas, because they last. We, work that we printed more than 15 years ago is still around, and it's really surprising when we pull out a piece and it's from like 2007, and they're like, that tortilla is from 2007, and it's like, yeah, unfortunately, like store-bought, because we just use we go to like a Safeway or a Costco and load up on tortillas. And in terms of preservation, it's very simple, but it's because the foods that we use right now are so processed.
Can I ask you, Rio, do they get moldy?
No. Part of that is because we do heat them on a grill, which like removes the moisture. So they're stiff as a board, but no, they don't mold. And like I said, that's one of the kind of shocking bits about it, is that, we have tortillas that are like 15, 16 years old at this point that have held up and have not gone bad, as it were.
I have a question for you, Rio. So would you say that printing on the store-bought tortillas is easier than printing on the ones Mama would make?
Yes, only in so much that the store-bought tortillas are more consistent in terms of the surface for printing. So they're much more conducive to printing with the silkscreen on them. We've tried buying like handmade tortillas or making them ourselves, but they are infinitely more delicious and nurturing, but
Yeah.
they just don't have an adequate printing surface, because they're just so much more random and unpredictable in terms of the surface to lay down ink on.
I think it's so cool that you use chocolate and food dye. That's brilliant.
Yeah, when you eat it, it's kind of like a mole, because we heat it up, and it's like you don't taste the food coloring, but the chocolate syrup like has like a kind of a nice sweetness to it when you eat the tortilla.
Wow.
Well, we've hit our time mark, and at this point, I want to give a very warm thank you to all of our panelists for their work and for their perseverance in the print exchange, which was sort of complicated, but I think, as we've shown, really worthwhile and productive and lovely. So thank you all so much. The organizers are so grateful. And at this point, I also want to remind folks that in the chat, there is a link to our print pop-up mixer where we hope you will join us. So it'll be an open Zoom room where we can all see each other, and we'll be able to casually share our prints with one another. So we hope to see you in that link in just a moment. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, all of you. That was really extraordinary.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was amazing.
Thank you so much for having us.